retired rancher lived alone for years, until 5 Apache women begged for shelter on his ranch. His wife, Mary, had loved the mornings when the sun painted the desert in gold, and the smell of fresh hay filled the air. Their children ran across the open land, laughing as they chased each other around the barns and pastures. John remembered those days fondly, but now, many years later, the ranch was quiet. Too quiet, some might say. Since retiring, John had spent his days tending to the ranch alone. After Mary passed away, the house felt emptier than ever. Even the small tasks that used to feel routine now reminded him of her absence. Making breakfast, fixing fences, feeding the animals, every chore carried a memory. At first, the silence was comforting. John liked to think, to walk the property in peace, and to enjoy the warmth of the sun without being rushed. But over time, the quiet began to weigh on him. There were days when he wished for a voice to talk to, a friendly laugh to break the monotony, or just someone to share a simple cup of coffee with. The ranch itself was vast, stretching for miles over sun-baked land and rolling hills. John often marveled at its beauty, the endless blue sky, the rugged cliffs in the distance, and the gentle sway of tall grasses in the wind. The animals he cared for were a constant source of comfort. Horses, cows, and chickens were more than livestock to John. They were companions in the rhythm of his life. He had always taken pride in his work, and the land had taught him patience and resilience. Each morning, before the sun rose fully, he would wake, pull on his boots, and step outside into the crisp desert air. The world felt quiet and still, almost as if it were waiting for him to start his day. Evenings on the ranch had their own charm. John would sit on the porch, watching the sky turn shades of pink and orange. Sometimes he would recall stories from his childhood or think about how Mary used to hum while preparing dinner. Nights were different. They were long and often lonely. The desert came alive with sounds, from the distant calls of owls to the rustle of small animals in the underbrush. Sometimes, John would lie awake listening, feeling both comforted and reminded of how alone he was. The silence at night could feel heavy, but it also gave him time to reflect on life, to remember joys and sorrows alike. John's neighbors lived miles away, and visits were rare. Occasionally, someone would stop by to share news or offer help, but most of the time he was on his own. He was independent by nature and had spent years managing the ranch with his own hands. Yet, despite his self-reliance, he sometimes longed for company. He missed the feeling of family around him, the chatter of children, and the warmth of shared stories by the fire. The ranch, once filled with laughter and life, now echoed with memories of the past. Despite the solitude, John found purpose in his daily routines. Feeding the animals, repairing fences, and tending to the land kept him active and gave him a sense of accomplishment. He enjoyed watching the horses graze, hearing the soft clucking of the chickens, and seeing the cows move lazily across the fields. Each task reminded him that life continued, even when it felt like the world had moved on without him. The ranch was his life, and he had poured decades into caring for it. Every corner of the land carried a story, every tree held a memory, and every worn path had been walked countless times by his own feet. Over the years, John had learned to appreciate small moments. A cloud passing over the sun, a hawk soaring in the sky, or the gentle wind brushing against his face could lift his spirits. He often told himself that life was simple here, that happiness could be found in quiet routines and connection with nature. But deep down, he also knew that humans were meant for companionship. Loneliness had become a constant companion, even as he continued to work tirelessly to maintain the ranch. John's neighbors often remarked that he was lucky to live in such a beautiful place, but he knew the truth. Beauty alone could not fill the emptiness that had settled in his heart. He sometimes wondered if he would spend the rest of his days like this, in a house echoing with memories, surrounded by land that was alive but missing the voices of those he loved. Yet he also believed in resilience. Life had taught him to endure hardships, to face challenges head-on, and to find strength even in difficult circumstances. Some days, John would wander along the edges of his property, walking slowly as he observed the desert landscape. The land was harsh, but it had a rhythm that he had learned to follow. He noticed patterns, the way shadows moved across the rocks, how the wind shaped the sand, and how the plants adapted to the scarce rainfall. These observations, simple as they were, brought him a sense of peace. They reminded him that even in isolation, there was a world outside himself, full of life and wonder. In his quiet moments, John often thought about the past. He remembered the laughter of his children as they played near the barn, the smell of Mary's cooking in the mornings, and the sound of the wind through the trees. These memories were bittersweet. They brought comfort, but also a longing for what had been lost. He would sit on the porch for hours, watching the horizon, feeling the weight of years gone by. It was during these times that John felt the deepest connection to life, even if it was tinged with sadness. Despite the solitude, John never stopped caring for others. He had always believed in helping those in need, whether it was a neighbor who required assistance or a stray animal in distress. The ranch was more than just land to him. It was a place where kindness could be practiced, even in small ways. He knew that the world could be harsh, but he also believed in the goodness that could be found in unexpected places. These beliefs had shaped him over decades, guiding his decisions and giving him a sense of purpose even when he was alone. As the days passed, John settled into a rhythm that balanced work and reflection. Mornings were for chores, afternoons for tending to the animals and the land, and evenings for quiet contemplation. He had learned to appreciate the small joys, a bird landing near the fence, the warmth of sunlight on his face, the gentle rustle of leaves in the wind. These moments reminded him that life was still present, even if it was different from what he had once known. John Matthews had lived a life full of love, loss, work, and solitude. The ranch had been his home, his sanctuary, and his responsibility. Every corner of it held memories of family, laughter, and hard work. Though he often felt the weight of loneliness, he had learned to find beauty in simplicity and strength in routine. Little did he know, his life was about to change in ways he had never imagined. The quiet that had defined his days was about to be interrupted, and the ranch that had been a place of solitude was about to become a place of connection and new beginnings. It was a particularly hot afternoon when John Matthews first noticed movement at the far edge of his property. The sun had been blazing all morning, turning the dirt paths a dusty gold and making the air shimmer with heat. John was repairing a broken fence near the corral, sweat rolling down his forehead, when he saw 5 figures slowly approaching from the horizon. At first, he squinted, unsure if he was imagining things. The desert had a way of playing tricks on the eyes, making heat waves and distant shapes appear as if they were moving. As the figures drew closer, John could see that they were 5 young women, walking cautiously across the rough terrain. Their clothes were dusty, worn, and patched in places, evidence of a long journey. Each step seemed deliberate, as though they were carrying more than just the weight of the day. They were carrying worry, fear, and a quiet determination. John stopped working, gripping his hammer tightly, unsure of what to expect. He hadn't had visitors in years. The thought of strangers approaching his home filled him with both curiosity and caution. When the women finally reached the edge of the ranch, they paused, glancing nervously at the sprawling property before them. John noticed that one of them, a young woman with dark hair braided tightly down her back, stepped forward slightly. She raised her hand in a small wave, her eyes meeting John's from a distance. There was a plea in her gaze, a silent request that he might not fully understand until they spoke. John remained quiet, leaning against the fence post, watching them carefully. He had always been polite, always willing to help, but caution was a part of life on the ranch. He had learned to protect himself and his home, especially when dealing with the unexpected. The young woman cleared her throat and spoke in a soft voice that carried just enough for John to hear. "Sir, please, we need shelter. We have nowhere else to go." Her words were simple, but they held urgency. John could see the exhaustion etched into each of the women's faces, the dirt under their fingernails, the weariness in their eyes, the slight limp of one who seemed to have walked farther than the others. They were tired, hungry, and afraid, and they had come to him in a moment of desperate need. John didn't answer immediately. He studied them carefully, noting their small, careful gestures, the way they looked around, almost as if expecting danger at every turn. There was honesty in their fear, a vulnerability that tugged at something deep within him. Memories of his own family, of Mary and the children, surfaced unbidden. He thought of all the times he had wished someone would knock on his door with news, help, or simply companionship. And now here they were, 5 young women asking for shelter in a way that stirred both empathy and caution. "Come closer," John finally said, his voice steady but gentle. He set down his hammer and wiped his hands on a rag. The women approached slowly, each step careful and measured, as though unsure whether he would truly let them in. Once they were close enough, he noticed the small details. The calluses on their hands, the careful way they carried their meager belongings, and the quiet courage that shone through their fear. They were strangers, yes, but they were also human beings in need, and John knew what it was to struggle. The young woman who had spoken first stepped forward again. "Sir, we were forced to leave our home. The reservation is flooded and there is nowhere safe for us. Please, can we stay even just for a few days?" Her voice wavered slightly, but there was a strength in her plea, a determination that spoke of resilience and hope. John could see that the others were looking at him with silent anticipation, their eyes wide, trusting him to make the right choice. John took a deep breath, feeling the heat of the sun on his back and the weight of responsibility pressing on him. He had always believed in helping others, in doing what was right, even when it required effort or risk. He thought of Mary and how she would have reacted, how she would have insisted on offering food, water, and shelter without hesitation. He thought of the small kindnesses that shaped life, the moments when one person could make a difference for another. And with that, he nodded slowly. "All right," he said. "You can come in, but you'll need to be careful. The ranch is big and there's work to do if you're staying." Relief washed over the women's faces. The tension in their bodies eased slightly and small smiles appeared. They thanked him softly, words of gratitude spoken in hushed, almost reverent tones. John watched them carefully as they followed him toward the ranch house. There was still caution on both sides, but the first step toward trust had been taken. The ranch house was old but sturdy, with walls that had weathered decades of sun, wind, and storms. Inside, the air was cooler than outside, and the smell of wood and hay gave a sense of warmth and comfort. John led the women into the main room and gestured toward the simple furnishings. "This is where you can stay for now," he said. "There are blankets in the cupboard. Eat what you need, and I'll make sure there's water and food." The women nodded, their gratitude quiet but deep. They moved with a mix of awe and practicality, setting down their few belongings and making themselves as comfortable as possible. John watched them, feeling an unexpected stir of connection. Here were 5 young women, strangers in his world, bringing with them stories he had yet to hear, lives he had yet to touch. The quiet of his home, which had been so complete just hours earlier, began to feel different. There was the possibility of life, of shared experience, of new beginnings. Over the next few days, the women helped around the ranch in small ways. They fed the animals, collected firewood, and swept the floors. John noticed how carefully they worked, how attentive they were to the land and the animals. He began to talk to them in small ways, asking their names, listening to their stories, and learning bits about their lives. They spoke of the reservation, of their families, and of the flooding that had forced them to leave. Each story carried emotion, fear, loss, hope, and resilience, and John found himself drawn into their world, feeling connected to experiences he had never known firsthand. There were moments of laughter, too, small sparks that brightened the ranch. One afternoon, while fixing a fence, John accidentally dropped a hammer near one of the women. She jumped back in surprise, then laughed at her own reaction. Soon, all 5 were chuckling, and John found himself smiling, feeling the warmth of human connection after years of solitude. These small moments, simple and ordinary, became lifelines for him, reminders that life could still bring joy, even in unexpected ways. John also noticed the strength and courage of the young women. They had traveled far under difficult conditions, facing uncertainty and danger, yet they carried themselves with dignity and resilience. Each had a story of perseverance, a way of adapting to hardship that inspired him. He realized that in their presence he was learning too, not just about survival, but about trust, compassion, and the quiet power of community. Evenings on the ranch took on a new rhythm. Instead of sitting alone, John found himself sharing meals with the women, listening to their stories and offering what wisdom he could. The house, once filled only with echoes of memory, now carried voices, laughter, and the soft sounds of activity. John felt a sense of renewal, as if the land itself had breathed new life into him. For the first time in many years, he looked forward to the days ahead, curious about the connections he was forming and the experiences that awaited him. As the days turned into a week, the initial caution between John and the women began to fade. They had proven themselves trustworthy, hardworking, and kind. John, in turn, offered guidance, shared his knowledge of the ranch, and ensured that they were safe and comfortable. The bond that began as necessity grew into genuine connection, built on mutual respect, empathy, and shared experience. Each day brought small victories, completed chores, laughter over shared meals, and the simple comfort of human presence. John knew that this was just the beginning. The women had entered his life unexpectedly, bringing with them the potential for change, growth, and connection. He had spent years in solitude, but now he could see the possibility of life renewed, of purpose rediscovered, and of a household filled not just with memories, but with the living presence of others. The ranch, once silent, was now alive with stories waiting to unfold, friendships waiting to deepen, and moments of learning and growth that would shape them all. The days on the ranch began to settle into a new rhythm, one that John Matthews had never expected. What had started as a moment of hesitation, unsure whether to trust strangers, had grown into a quiet, steady routine filled with shared work, laughter, and stories. The 5 young Apache women were no longer simply guests. They had become part of the ranch, weaving their presence into every corner of the land. John noticed it in small ways: the sound of their voices in the kitchen, the careful attention they gave to the animals, and the warmth that seemed to fill the old house. Each morning began with the sun casting its first golden rays over the property. John would step outside, feeling the familiar warmth on his face, but now the quiet of the mornings was interrupted by the gentle bustle of activity. The women moved with purpose, collecting eggs from the chicken coop, checking on the horses, and preparing simple breakfast for everyone. Their presence brought energy and life, and even the animals seemed to sense the change. Horses neighed more readily, and the cows moved about with a quiet curiosity, as if welcoming the new rhythms of the ranch. John, for his part, had taken to observing the women as they worked. He admired the way they approached tasks with care and determination. One of them, a tall young woman with sharp, intelligent eyes, had a natural ability to handle the animals, calming the horses with a gentle voice and steady hands. Another, smaller in stature, moved quickly and efficiently, sweeping the floors, tending the garden, and gathering firewood with tireless energy. Each had a skill that contributed to the ranch in a way that was both practical and inspiring. John found himself learning from them, noticing approaches to tasks he had overlooked for decades. Their conversations were a blend of practicality and storytelling. As they worked, they spoke of the lands they had left behind, the traditions of their families, and the challenges they had faced. John listened, sometimes asking questions, sometimes quietly absorbing their words. He was fascinated by the way they described their lives, the rituals, the celebrations, and the wisdom passed down through generations. It was a world he had known little about, yet it was rich with meaning, resilience, and strength. In listening, John felt a connection not only to the women, but also to a broader sense of humanity and history, one that stretched far beyond the boundaries of his own ranch. There were moments when the work brought laughter. One afternoon, as John tried to demonstrate a new method for fixing a fence, he accidentally tripped over a loose plank. The women gasped for a second, then erupted in laughter, not in a cruel way, but in a light-hearted, joyful manner that filled the air. John couldn't help but chuckle at himself as he picked himself up, brushing the dust off his jeans. These small moments of shared amusement became frequent, reminding John that life could still hold joy and playfulness, even after years of solitude. Evenings took on a new warmth. After a long day of work, the group would gather around the kitchen table for dinner. Meals were simple but nourishing: vegetables from the garden, bread, and meat from the ranch. But the act of eating together made them feel richer than any feast. Conversation flowed easily, with stories, jokes, and reflections on the day. John often found himself recounting tales from his own childhood and youth, of lessons learned on the ranch, and of adventures with Mary and their children. The women listened attentively, occasionally sharing how similar experiences in their own lives had shaped them. The exchange of stories created bonds, weaving threads of understanding and friendship between generations and cultures. John also noticed how much the women cared for the land. They were curious about the desert plants, asking questions about which herbs were useful, which flowers were native, and which areas of the ranch required extra attention. One day, as John showed them how to repair a water trough, They asked about the types of plants that grew along the edges of the pasture. He explained how certain shrubs could indicate water sources and how the trees provided shade for the livestock during the hot summer months. They listened eagerly, soaking up every word, and even offered suggestions based on their knowledge of local plants and traditions. John was impressed by their wisdom and adaptability, realizing that their presence was not only helpful but enlightening. Beyond the chores and daily routines, John began to see the deeper impact the women had on him. The silence that had once felt comforting now seemed stifling when he remembered it. Their laughter, curiosity, and energy filled a void he had not realized was so deep. The ranch, which had felt vast and lonely, was now alive with shared purpose. John began to look forward to waking up each morning, not just for the work itself, but for the chance to interact with the women, to learn from them, and to share small moments of joy and understanding. There were also quiet, reflective moments when John observed the women. At times, they would sit together outside, talking softly or simply watching the sunset. He noticed how they supported one another, offering comfort, advice, or encouragement when one of them seemed tired or worried. Their bonds mirrored the sense of community he had longed for, and he found himself reflecting on the importance of connection, trust, and care in human life. The way they treated each other with respect and kindness reminded him of values that he had cherished, but often overlooked in his solitary days. One afternoon, John invited the women to join him on a walk around the ranch. They followed him along the dusty trails, past the pastures, barns, and orchards. John explained the history of the land, telling them stories of his father, of the times the ranch had faced droughts or floods, and of the hard work required to keep it running. The women listened intently, asking thoughtful questions and sharing how their own families had managed the challenges of life in the desert. By the time the sun began to dip below the horizon, they had formed a deeper understanding of one another, a shared appreciation for the land, and an unspoken bond that grew stronger with every step. As the days passed, John realized that trust was building on both sides. The women had proven themselves dependable and honest, while he had provided them safety, guidance, and care. This mutual respect created a foundation that allowed them to relax, laugh, and learn together. John noticed subtle changes in his own heart, patience he had forgotten, compassion that had grown deeper, and a renewed sense of purpose that came from helping others and sharing his knowledge. The ranch was no longer a place of solitude. It had become a place of life, energy, and meaningful connection. In addition to the physical labor and storytelling, John found himself learning lessons about resilience and courage from the women. Each had faced hardships, from natural disasters to displacement, yet they carried themselves with dignity and determination. They adapted to the ranch life quickly, offering suggestions, helping each other, and finding creative solutions to problems. John realized that despite their youth, they possessed wisdom and strength that complemented his own experience. Together, they created a dynamic in which everyone contributed, learned, and grew. The ranch, once a symbol of isolation, now symbolized something entirely different. It had become a place where lives intersected, where past and present blended, and where mutual support created a sense of family. John had spent years alone, thinking he was content with solitude, but he now understood that true fulfillment came from connection, shared effort, and care for others. The presence of the women transformed the land from a quiet retreat into a vibrant, living space filled with energy, warmth, and hope. By the end of the week, John felt a deep sense of gratitude. The initial hesitation and uncertainty had given way to trust, friendship, and collaboration. The women had not only found shelter but had brought life, joy, and meaning to his days. The ranch, which had been a place of memory and solitude, had been reborn as a home of community, laughter, and shared experience. John realized that even after decades of living alone, new beginnings were possible, and that unexpected encounters could lead to profound change. The bond between John and the women continued to grow stronger. Simple acts, sharing a meal, working together in the fields, watching the sunset, or telling stories, created moments of connection that deepened with time. John often reflected on how life could surprise him, bringing people into his world in ways he never anticipated. The presence of the 5 young women had not only changed the rhythm of his days, but had also rekindled a sense of purpose, hope, and belonging that he thought he had lost forever. As the days turned into weeks, the bond between John Matthews and the 5 young Apache women deepened. What had started as a hesitant act of kindness had blossomed into a rhythm of life that brought warmth, energy, and a renewed sense of purpose to the ranch. John had begun to notice changes not only in the ranch itself, but also within himself. The old solitude that had once defined his days seemed a distant memory. The laughter, chatter, and shared work of the women had breathed new life into the home he thought he had outgrown. The ranch had always been a place of work, discipline, and quiet reflection, but now it carried an air of collaboration. Each morning the group worked together, tending to the animals, maintaining fences, and preparing meals. The women had learned the routines quickly, adapting to the rhythm of ranch life with remarkable ease. They approached each task with a combination of respect for the land and creativity, suggesting new ways to care for the animals or improve the garden. John observed them closely, often quietly amazed at their insight and initiative. They were more than helpers. They were companions, bringing new ideas, energy, and life to a place he had once thought unchangeable. One of the women, the tallest with expressive eyes, had a particular talent for caring for the horses. She could calm even the most skittish animal with a gentle voice and careful movements. John found himself watching her in awe, realizing that her presence made the ranch not only more manageable, but also more alive. The horses seemed to respond to her, moving with ease and trust, and even the other animals seemed calmer in her company. John began to see the women not just as visitors, but as vital parts of the ranch, each contributing in unique ways that strengthened both the land and their relationships. Beyond the work, there was learning and teaching happening on both sides. John shared his decades of knowledge about ranching, teaching the women how to repair fences properly, manage the livestock, and care for the land sustainably. In return, they taught him about their culture, traditions, and connection to the desert. They explained the importance of certain plants, the stories behind natural landmarks, and the traditional ways their families had lived in harmony with the land for generations. John listened intently, fascinated by the depth of their understanding and the wisdom carried through their words. He realized that he was learning as much from them as they were from him, and the exchange became a foundation for mutual respect and admiration. Evenings became the most treasured part of the day. After long hours of work, they would gather around the kitchen table, sharing meals, stories, and laughter. The food was simple, often harvested from the ranch or prepared with care, but the act of sharing it created a sense of togetherness that John had longed for in his years of solitude. They talked about their families, dreams, fears, and hopes. John found himself opening up in ways he hadn't in years, sharing anecdotes from his youth, stories of Mary, and memories of his children growing up on the ranch. The women listened with patience and empathy, their eyes reflecting understanding and respect. These evenings, filled with conversation and connection, became moments of healing for everyone involved. One particular evening, after a long day of tending to the livestock and preparing firewood, John sat quietly on the porch while the women gathered around a small fire. The sky had turned a deep shade of purple, and the first stars began to appear. The women shared a story from their culture, explaining the significance of constellations and the lessons passed down from elders. John listened, captivated by the beauty of their words and the rhythm of their storytelling. He realized that these moments were more than just stories. They were a bridge between generations, a way to preserve wisdom and connect deeply with one another. As time passed, the women grew more comfortable in their new surroundings, and John found that the ranch had transformed in ways he hadn't anticipated. The house felt alive again, filled with warmth, movement, and laughter. Even the animals seemed happier, responding to the energy and care that now permeated the ranch. The land, once quiet and still, was alive with shared purpose and connection. John felt a deep sense of gratitude for the unexpected presence of the women, who had brought new meaning to his life, and reminded him of the joy that comes from community and shared effort. Their bond extended beyond daily routines. The women supported one another in moments of difficulty, offering encouragement, guidance, and comfort. John observed this closely, noting the strength and resilience that came from mutual support. They faced challenges together, whether it was a stubborn animal, a broken fence, or an unexpected storm. The way they worked as a team inspired John and reminded him of the value of unity, trust, and collaboration. He realized that their presence had transformed not only the ranch, but also his understanding of life, community, and the importance of caring for one another. One afternoon, John decided to teach the women a skill he had always valued: horseback riding. The women were eager to learn, approaching the task with a mix of excitement and caution. John guided them patiently, showing them how to mount the horses, hold the reins, and maintain balance. Their determination impressed him. They listened carefully, practiced diligently, and supported one another through mistakes and successes. By the end of the day, the women were riding confidently, laughing as they guided their horses through the pastures. John felt a profound sense of pride and joy, realizing that these moments of teaching and learning strengthened not only their skills, but also their bond as a group. The women also contributed to the ranch in creative ways. They painted signs for the barns, decorated the porch with flowers, and even helped improve the garden with new planting techniques. John noticed that their energy and creativity brought a vibrancy to the ranch that he had never imagined. Tasks that had once felt routine became opportunities for collaboration and innovation. He found himself looking forward to their ideas and suggestions, enjoying the fresh perspective they brought to the land he had cared for all his life. Through their presence, John rediscovered a sense of purpose he had thought lost. The ranch was no longer simply a place of work. It was a home filled with shared responsibility, learning, and joy. The women's laughter, curiosity, and care reminded him that life could still bring surprises, growth, and deep connections, even in the later stages of life. He found himself feeling more alive, more connected, and more hopeful than he had in years. John also began to reflect on the importance of kindness and trust. By offering shelter and support to the women, he had created an environment where they could thrive, and in return, they had enriched his life in countless ways. He realized that generosity was not just about giving material things. It was about creating space for others to feel safe, valued, and empowered. The experience taught him that opening one's heart could lead to unexpected rewards, transforming not only the lives of others, but also one's own. As the weeks continued, the women's presence became a stabilizing force in John's life. Their routines, laughter, and support created a sense of normalcy and belonging that he had longed for. The ranch, once quiet and isolated, was now vibrant with activity, learning, and connection. John began to imagine a future where the women would remain as part of the household, contributing their knowledge, energy, and creativity to the ongoing care of the land and animals. The idea brought him a sense of peace and joy he had not felt in years. One evening, as the group gathered for dinner, John looked around the table and felt a profound sense of gratitude. The women had transformed his life in ways he had never anticipated. Their courage, resilience, and kindness had rekindled a sense of purpose within him, reminding him that life's greatest gifts often come unexpectedly. They had brought warmth, laughter, and connection to a place that had once felt lonely and quiet. John realized that this was more than just a temporary arrangement. It was the beginning of a lasting bond, a new chapter in the story of his life and the ranch he loved. The women, too, had grown attached to the ranch and to John. They respected the land, valued the lessons he shared, and contributed their own knowledge and skills. They felt safe, supported, and empowered, and they had formed friendships that would last a lifetime. The shared experiences of work, storytelling, learning, and laughter had created a sense of family that transcended age, culture, and background. Together, they had built something beautiful, a home filled with connection, care, and shared purpose. John knew that life had changed forever on the ranch. The solitude he had once cherished was no longer necessary, nor was it desired. The presence of the 5 women had created a new rhythm, a new energy, and a new understanding of what it meant to live fully. The ranch had become more than land. It was a home, a community, and a place where hearts and minds could grow together. John felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing that this chapter of his life would be remembered not for loneliness, but for connection, generosity, and the unexpected joy of opening one's heart to others. By the time the rains of the season began to ease, John Matthews realized that the 5 Apache women had become more than just guests on the ranch. They had become family. What had started as a simple act of generosity, offering temporary shelter to strangers in need, had grown into something far deeper. The women had brought vitality, laughter, and warmth into the ranch, transforming it into a home that pulsed with life. John could scarcely remember the long, quiet days he had once endured alone, and he felt a sense of fulfillment that he had never thought possible in his later years. Each morning, John woke to the gentle sounds of activity. The women had settled into routines alongside his own, caring for the animals, tending the garden, and preparing meals. Their laughter floated across the pastures, mixing with the soft neighing of horses and the clucking of chickens. The ranch was alive with energy, yet there was a harmony to it that John found profoundly comforting. He had spent years alone, thinking that solitude was enough, but now he understood that connection and shared purpose brought a richness to life that solitude never could. Over time, the women and John developed unspoken ways of working together. Without being told, they knew which tasks each preferred, how to complement each other's strengths, and how to support one another when the work grew hard. The tallest woman, with her calm and steady presence, often led the horses to the pasture and ensured they were fed on time. Another, smaller but quick and nimble, focused on keeping the garden flourishing and the animals' pens clean. Together, they formed a seamless team, and John marveled at their efficiency, teamwork, and the joy with which they approached their work. The women also became part of the deeper life of the ranch, sharing stories, traditions, and knowledge that enriched John's understanding of the land and the world around him. They taught him how to identify desert herbs, explain the significance of certain plants and animals, and shared rituals that honored the cycles of nature. In return, John shared his decades of experience, teaching them about the rhythms of ranch life, the care of animals, and the challenges and rewards of managing a vast property. Through this exchange, they learned from each other, blending knowledge and wisdom in a way that created mutual respect and admiration. Evenings became treasured times for reflection and connection. After long days of work, the group would gather around the kitchen table, sharing meals prepared with care. The conversation flowed easily, moving from stories of childhood and family to lessons learned on the ranch. Laughter often erupted unexpectedly, filling the rooms with warmth and joy. John had long ago thought that his days of sharing life with others were over, but now he found that these evenings were some of the most meaningful moments of his life. He listened as the women spoke of their hopes and dreams, and in turn, he shared the lessons life had taught him. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills and painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, John sat on the porch watching the women work together to gather firewood. Their teamwork reminded him of his own family, of days long past when children ran across the fields and Mary had hummed in the kitchen. A wave of gratitude washed over him. The ranch, once quiet and lonely, was now a place of belonging and shared purpose. He realized that life could surprise even in its later chapters, offering opportunities for connection, growth, and renewal when least expected. The bond between John and the women deepened with every passing day. They had become a source of strength for one another, offering encouragement, guidance, and comfort in moments of doubt or challenge. One day, during a particularly hot afternoon, one of the women struggled to guide a stubborn horse. John noticed the frustration in her expression and quietly offered advice, demonstrating patience and care. Instead of tension, the moment became an opportunity for learning and mutual respect. By the time the horse calmed, laughter had replaced frustration, and the experience strengthened their relationship, showing that trust and cooperation could overcome challenges. John began to notice how much he had learned from the women. Their resilience, optimism, and determination inspired him daily. They had faced hardship, displacement, and uncertainty, yet they carried themselves with dignity and courage. John realized that life's lessons were not limited to one generation or culture. Wisdom and strength could be found in unexpected places. He felt grateful that these young women had come into his life, teaching him as much about perseverance, trust, and compassion as he had taught them about ranch life. The women, in turn, had grown attached to the ranch and to John. They respected the land, cared for the animals, and embraced the routines with dedication and pride. Beyond their practical contributions, they had created a sense of home, filling the house with warmth, laughter, and love. They shared their stories and traditions, celebrating small achievements and comforting one another in moments of doubt. John observed the way they interacted and realized that the bonds they had formed were more than temporary. They were enduring relationships built on trust, respect, and mutual care. One afternoon, John took the women on a long walk across the ranch, pointing out familiar landmarks, hidden watering holes, and areas where the land had been affected by past storms. He shared stories of his own childhood, of his parents, of Mary, and of the lessons learned from decades of working the ranch. The women listened attentively, asking thoughtful questions and sharing similar experiences from their own lives. By the time they returned to the house, the sun was dipping low in the sky, casting long shadows across the pastures. John felt a profound sense of connection, not just to the women, but to the land, the past, and the possibility of the future. As the weeks passed, John realized that the ranch had become more than just a place of shelter. It was now a home filled with love, learning, and shared purpose. He knew that life would never return to the quiet solitude he had once known, and he no longer wished it to. The women had transformed the ranch, but more importantly, they had transformed him. He had found joy, companionship, and meaning in ways he had never imagined possible in his later years. The loneliness he had once felt had been replaced with a profound sense of belonging. John began to consider the future in a new way. He understood that the women were now an essential part of the ranch, and he felt a responsibility to ensure their continued comfort and security. One evening he sat with them on the porch, the desert sky ablaze with stars, and quietly shared his thoughts. "I want you all to stay," he said, his voice calm but full of warmth. "This ranch isn't just mine anymore, it belongs to all of us. You've made it alive again. I can't imagine it without you." The women looked at him, eyes wide with gratitude and surprise, and then a gentle, shared smile passed between them. Their acceptance of John's offer brought a new sense of permanence to the ranch. The house, once a quiet and lonely structure, had become a home in the truest sense, a place of safety, warmth, and shared life. The women decorated, planted flowers, and added personal touches that reflected their culture and experiences. They continued to care for the animals, tend the land, and contribute their knowledge, creativity, and energy. Together, they created a household that was rich in life, learning, and mutual respect. Neighbors and visitors who had once seen John as a solitary rancher began to notice the transformation. The ranch had become a place of vitality, joy, and cooperation. John's days were now filled with shared laughter, meaningful work, and the quiet satisfaction of watching the women grow and thrive alongside him. Even the animals seemed happier, responding to the warmth and energy that filled the property. John realized that he had been given a second chance, a chance to experience family, friendship, and community in a way that had seemed impossible only months earlier. In the evenings, the group would sit together by the fire, sharing stories, reflecting on the day, and planning for the future. John marveled at how much had changed, and yet how natural it all felt. The women had become a vital part of his life, bringing strength, laughter, and connection that filled a void he had long accepted as permanent. He had learned that life could surprise him at any age, offering opportunities for love, friendship, and growth that could transform even the quietest, loneliest days. As time passed, John often reflected on the journey that had brought them together. What had begun as a simple request for shelter had grown into a lasting bond that enriched everyone's life. The women had not only found safety and a home, had become part of a living, breathing family. John had not only found companionship and joy, he had rediscovered purpose, resilience, and hope. Together, they had created something enduring, a home, a family, and a shared life that would continue to flourish for years to come. The ranch, once a symbol of solitude and quiet, had become a place of life, connection, and love. John understood that the most meaningful moments in life often came unexpectedly, carried on the steps of those who needed kindness as much as he needed them. And as he looked across the pastures, listening to the laughter of the women and the sounds of animals settling in for the night, he knew that his life had been transformed. The ranch was no longer just land. It was a home, a family, and a testament to the power of generosity, trust, and human connection. John Matthews had spent years alone, thinking that his best days were behind him. But in opening his heart and his home to 5 young women, he had discovered a truth he would carry forever. It is never too late to create bonds, to find joy, and to build a life that is rich with purpose, love, and shared experience. The ranch, alive with stories, laughter, and hope, had become a testament to the beauty of unexpected friendship and the enduring power of human kindness.